All right, welcome to Live, Lead, and In Between, a podcast for leaders who want to be better at leading in life and everywhere in between. My name is Travis Jones, and I am the host for this podcast, and I want to say again, welcome. Today's topic actually comes from a listener request, and actually this is the second recording of this. I actually recorded the first one, and I went back and rewatched it, and I was like, that's horrible, right? So I figured I need to change some stuff in it. So you're watching the second recording. Hopefully you'll never see the first with that, or you're listening to the second. Hopefully you'll never listen to the first because it wasn't that great with it. But today's topic, actually before I get to the topic, I want to say wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it's on YouTube or wherever you consume your podcast content, I would love it if you would click subscribe, like, leave me a comment, any of those things. And heck, shoot me an email. In the show notes, you'll find the email for Live, Lead, and In Between in there as well. Always love show topics and things like that to come from. And as a matter of fact, today's topic is one by request. One of my listeners gave me a couple topics they'd like for me to cover. And when they sent it to me, I was like, yep, sure, I'll give those a cover, and I'll handle those, and I'll tackle them, and however I want to word it there. And so before we get started, I want to read the first one before we jump into it. And the actual, when I say read the first one, I'm going to read the actual question or comment that the listener had. It says, okay, I've got some topics for you. It says, cuss words. Like, aren't they just words? And it's the context in what you're saying, right? What's up with a word being bad? So I thought, yeah, that's going to be a really interesting one to handle. And the reason I think it's going to be an interesting one to handle is that I've been known to drop some cuss words from time to time. And here's the thing. I know the short answer to that question. I know the short answer is an easy answer. It's the same answer we kind of give our kids when they say a bad word or things like that. So I think we can answer the question easily, but I also think we have to, before we do that, we have to address the root behind the question, behind the issue itself, so that the actual answer that we give with that question will have some weight to it. Like I said, it took me a little while to process this kind of thing. And here's the reason. I've been known to drop a couple words from time to time. And just last night, our dogs woke up, like 1:00, wanting to go out. My wife took them out. And I woke up with it as well. At 3:00, they wanted to go out. I woke up then, and I'm a light sleeper, and so it takes me a while to get back to sleep. And I went to bed at like 10, right? So this is happening like this, very broken. And then at like 5, our toddler, our 2 a.m. toddler, our 2-year-old toddler, decided he was up and gonna just light up and stuff like that. And I remember throwing out a word, both verbally and in my head at the same time. So I'm an offender when it comes to this, and I think most of us are offenders. Now, there are a couple people I know that probably haven't ever said a cuss word, or at least I haven't heard them say a cuss word, but just so you know, this is coming from an offender today as far as the content. So it's very convicting to actually walk through this. But again, to look at the root of the answer is where we need to go before we actually give the short answer for it. And the root of the answer is we need to understand that the fact that our words, your words, my words, everyone's words actually have power associated with them. Now, here's what I'm going to say about that. I'm going to come from a perspective of a follower of Jesus, and I make no apologies for that. So just know that whatever information I'm giving out, I'm going to come from a scriptural perspective on. And so if you've stumbled upon this podcast and this is not what you're looking for, then just know that that's where I'm coming from with this. And I would encourage you just to listen for listening's sake, just to see how you feel about what's being said with that. So the first thing I'll say is there's an old adage that a lot of people used to say that I was taught growing up with regard to words, bad words, cuss words, people saying things to you and like that. And it was taught in elementary school. My mom taught me this. I mean, I'm sure the majority of your moms out there or dads or grandparents taught you this. And it was sticks and stones. I'm going to read it. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will or can never hurt me. And I remember hearing that. And the problem with that statement is there's been whole movements in history that have been started with words. And so while you can say sticks and stones, yes, they can do physical damage, but when you turn around and say words can never hurt me, I'm going to say that's complete garbage, and that's out of touch with reality, especially if the words that you're using with a person are negative and already in line with what they believe to be true about themselves. Now, I need to just put a disclaimer out there. If we're not careful when we're talking about this, it can come across as kind of the woke nonsense that's out there where everything you say can offend someone. That's not what I'm talking about here. I am by no means woke. I think all that's garbage as well. But what I'm generally saying is when you say a word, whether it's careless or not, and someone already believes that negative thing to be true about themselves, it can do damage. It can do damage. We are created in the image of God, and God actually creates with his spoken word. You find it throughout Scripture, and the Lord spoke, and boom, there was, right? We are like him. He is not like us, but we are like him. He has the ability to call that which is not into existence, like to literally create things from his spoken word, because there's power in that. We can't create things with our spoken word, but we can create our own realities with our spoken word. Now, if you are married, follow me for a second, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Have you ever said something in passing to your spouse? Maybe you're walking in the hall at your house or up the stairs or in the kitchen or whatnot, and you said something careless, you didn't think about it, and when you said it, immediately the environment changed, right? The reality of the environment changed because now your spouse is angry, or it was said to you, and so it changes the environment. So you know what I'm talking about. Our words have power, and they have the power to create the realities that we inhabit. So the sticks and stones adage, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Garbage. Words have the ability to hurt. Cuss words, we're going to get there, but we're looking at the root here. Cuss words do have the ability to hurt because of what the motive is behind them. But like I said, we'll get there. The second part of this is what's in you. Scripture says, Luke 6:45 says this. It says, what you say flows from what's in your heart. So I think that this is one of those things that is absolute uncomfortable truth. Especially, like I said, this was convicting because it's, what's in you is what comes out. It's like a glass of coffee or a glass of wine, and I'm going to use both, right? I have a coffee. I've got my goldfish mug. If you're listening, you can't see it, but I've got a goldfish mug that I drink coffee out of. My son, actually, my oldest son made it when he was in, elementary school and whatnot. It's got his drawing on it. Love it. Drink coffee out of it. But there is zero chance if I am walking up the stairs with this mug and I bump the wall, there is zero chance that this mug, which contains coffee, if I'm bumped and spill it, that Sprite will come out of it, because that's not what's in it. Coffee's in it. And so what's in you comes out. It's also like, let's use red wine, because that's the most sustainable thing I can think of. When you have toddlers or kids, and you indulge, let's say you have a glass of red wine, you always put that red wine up in a place where it's not going to get bumped, because no one expects, if that red wine glass is bumped either on you or onto the floor, whether it's hardwood carpet or anything, no one expects that water is going to come out of that glass. It's not going to be like a reverse Jesus moment where the wine turns to water, right? They expect wine to come out, and the thing about wine and the thing about coffee is it will stain. It will stain. Red wine specifically and black coffee will stain carpet. There's a whole other message in that. And then, you know what? I mean, let's actually go there for a second. Let's go to the whole staining power of our words. Our words do have the power to stain, much like the example I was using. When we use words inappropriately, and I'm not just talking about cuss words. Again, we're at the root behind things. When we use words inappropriately, they have the ability to put a stain on the soul of another person. They have the ability to create a wound that, unless addressed and allowed to heal, can turn into bitterness and resentment and all kinds of other stuff. And it actually can do the person damage in the long term, all because of a careless word or an intentional hurtful word. Now, I said that stains are hard to, like I mentioned with the coffee and the wine, that their stains are hard to get out. But I'm going to use that in kind of a double way, that once you've got a stain, it's hard to get out. I mean, do you see what I'm saying? There are people that I know that are living with wounds that were created by the careless words or the intentionally harmful words of another person right now. Like there are people I know that are living with that. And listen, I have wounded people out of my own ignorance with my words. And people have wounded me too from there. And again, sometimes it was intentional, sometimes it was unintentional. But most people will never tell you that you've done that when you have. So words have the ability to stain. Your words have the ability and the potential energy, and I like saying it that way because I have a little bit of a science background, but your words have the potential to place marks on a person's mind, emotions, and they will make decisions using their will based off those marks or wounds, those stains that are there. If you don't believe me, you can think of a time that someone said something to you that you kind of already believed to be true about you, and it kind of connected, and then from here on out, you started making decisions based off what you believed to be true, and someone else confirmed, even though that was not true about you, right? You see what I'm saying? Because of a careless word or an intentional word or an attack or things like that lined up with what you already believed, now you're making decisions based off that. So your words have the ability to stain and do damage. So words in themselves, like again, what's in you, what's bumped when you're in, what I'm getting excited about this, what is in you when you're bumped actually comes out, right? And when it comes out, it has the ability to bump or, to stain or to do damage and create your own realities with that. So there's the generic talk through on words, right? And the roots behind, right, what we do and the motives, right? And so that really gets to it. Now let's address the actual cuss words, swear words, however you want to label them. Let's address that right now. So the thing you have to know about like profane words, right? Or cuss words, again, whatever you want to call them, they've got tons of different names. Cuss words, curse, curse specifically is a negative thing. But here's the thing about most words like that, most cuss words that you can think of are words that actually profane something that was meant to be good. I want you to think about that for a second. Most words that are considered cuss words are derogatory, and they describe something that actually was meant to be a good thing. Now, not all, mind you, but the majority are attempts to color something that it was meant to be good in a negative light. And really, it's the motive behind the word that you use that would make it a bad word, right? If you're attempt to color something negative, if you're attempting to do that's there's a bad motive behind that. So that's kind of what makes it a bad word. Now, I'm not going to do an exhaustive history. There's no way I can on the origin of swearing and cussing and all those things like that. But you have to know that those words have been around since the beginning of time. And they've changed. Some have shifted this way and that way. And the point is they're always derogatory, and they're always used to describe something that was meant to be a good thing for the most part, or something that's not bad, right? It just is. But now we've attached a label to it and a motive behind it, and that kind of shapes the way people receive it. So the use of cuss words is an attempt. Now here's a big thing. And it took me a while when I actually landed on this a couple years back about cussing and things like that, especially at people or using words like that. If it's directed at people, you got to know that cussing or curse words are an attempt to be violent with words. It's one of those things where, like, I'm not going to swing at you, but I'm going to throw words at you, and hopefully you'll swing at me kind of thing. It's an attempt to be violent with words, and it's more about control and intimidation of a person rather than the words you're using, right? Does that make sense? Cuss is more about control and intimidation of a person rather than the word that you're actually using. Derogatory words used to label a person. Here's another little point, and I don't want to get too technical with this because one of my listeners was like, I can't, when you get technical about stuff, you lose me. But when you use derogatory words to label a person, that's the exact same thing. With the exception of the fact that they devalue a person below yourself. Like, so let me give you an example of that. If I come upon somebody and they cut me off in traffic and we both get out of our cars and I'm calling the guy names, I'm trying to make the guy less than me in that moment, right? The motive behind all the names I'm calling the guy, all the cussing I'm doing is to devalue him or her less than me, right? So that I'm intimidating and trying to control the situation with my words. Curse words usually come out and they're attached to anger, and they're usually there in an attempt to inflict harm or punishment. That's why they're exchanged like that. Now, I can say this with certainty. Anytime that I have used a cuss word, there's always been a better option available to me. Always. There's always been a better option available to me other than the word that I chose. But typically the word that I chose, when I think about it, has to do more with me trying to control or intimidate when I use that word, or to use violence with my words, right? That's kind of the thing behind it. So anytime I've done that, and like I said, I've been known to drop, I'm an offender when it comes to this. That's where it's come from. So let's address the other side of this, where it's the vernacular of a person who throws these words. Like, vernacular means that's just part of their everyday speech, right? They just throw around cuss words all the time. And now I know people like that. You know people like that that just throw them around. So let's kind of address that. In my opinion, there are really two reasons why a person does that. Number one is they're just careless with their speech. Flat out, they're just careless. They just drop it like it's hot. They're just careless with what they say, and they just throw them out there, thinking there's nothing wrong with it. The second is the environment where the person, grew up or was reared in or exists in. It's an ordinary practice, and the gravity of it isn't understood, right? There's ignorance associated with the use of those words. Like, I'm just using words, right? What does it matter? Well, guess what? Words have power associated with them, right? They do have power, and the gravity needs to be understood, whether they're good words or bad words. It's power that's there. We're gonna discuss again the whole bad word thing, how a word can be bad. But let me tell you a quick story that came to my mind when I was thinking through some of this stuff. I was doing a membership class at a church. Now, this doesn't involve cuss words. This just involves words. And I didn't know it, but after that membership class, I was speaking to a group of people, and I was talking negatively about myself. And after we got done talking and whatnot, most of them left. And one African-American lady kind of hung around, and she came up to me afterwards, and she said this, and I have to read it because I wrote it down because it's still kind of ingrained in my mind. And she said, "Pastor, remember the power of your words." And I thought for a second. She just turned around and walked off. And it was like, here's a brick. Hold it for a second. Remember the power of your words. And what she was saying was, you shouldn't be speaking negatively about yourself or to anybody because your words have power. And I was speaking negatively about myself, and I was creating my own reality in that moment, right? My own reality was coming out of my mouth. It was negative. And God used her to gently remind me that was unacceptable because he's the one who dictates reality, not me. And so she said, remember the power of your words. So those words have gravity, right? Cuss words have gravity to them. Whether you use them kind of just throwing them out haphazardly, they have gravity and weight because all words do. All words. So let's address the question, how can a word be bad? How can a word be bad? We know they have gravity. We know that what's in you when you're bumped, it comes out. We get that now. So how can a word be bad? All words carry potential. All words, spoken words, carry potential. Now, what I mean by that is that words are, in general, emotive and carry a creative force when spoken. Now, emotive, I mean emotional. They have action and emotion attached to them for the most part, and they are creative. They're creative. Words have creative force when spoken because we are created in the image of God, and that's how he creates. Our words have creative force and are emotive. So how can a word be bad? The determining factor behind whether a word is good or bad has to do with the motive behind the word being used. Number one, why are you using that word in that context, right? Or not so much in the context. Why are you using the word in general? Like, why are you using a cuss word? Is there any other word that's available that doesn't have the second thing that I'm going to talk about here? Why are you using the word? Is the motivation because you want to control, intimidate? What are you using that word for in that moment, right? Are you using it as an adjective or using it to describe something? Well, does it accurately describe it, or is it just a derogatory term that you're familiar with and you threw in there thinking it would give it some more oomph when you say it, right? So number one, is the motive behind what you're using, is it appropriate, or is there a different motive behind it? So that's the first determining factor. The second determining factor of whether a word is bad is the history of the word in the community and culture that you exist, right? Is there history to that word? Now, again, I said at the beginning of this, I am not talking about the woke catalog of offensiveness, because Lord knows that exists out there, and you can't say anything without offending someone. You can't say, I'm going to say it, you can't say a guy's a guy and a woman's a woman without offending someone who believes they're not, right? I'm not talking about that garbage. I'm talking about a long-established culture and community and the history of the words they find offensive and why. Because, again, those shift over time. Derogatory words. World War II, there were a whole list of derogatory words used to describe people who were the enemy in that moment, but who are no longer the enemy now. And those words have derogatory, they're cuss words now, right? They're using, because you see what I'm saying? The label that's attached to them. So how can a word be bad? Number one, your motive. Number two, the history behind the word. If there's history behind the word and it's an attempt to profane something good, it's bad, right? If it's an attempt to describe something good, but it's used in a negative fashion, it's a bad word nonetheless, or so to speak, right? That's what I would tell my kid. So the short answer is motive and the culture and community and the history behind the word. That's really what makes cuss words, right? The motive and the culture and history behind the word. So the last thing I want to say is, what's our responsibility with regard to this? Do we have a responsibility when it comes to words? And I would say absolutely we do. You are the only person who is in charge of you. Now, I could say it a little differently. The only person you can control is you. You really can't control anybody else. So a good measure of maturity is the ability to control yourself, right? The ability to choose things wisely. And so what I would say is, and I'm speaking to the choir because I'm an offender right now, I need to choose my words more wisely, because my words have power. My words have power. They're emotive, they're creative, and I can create my own reality, or I can hurt and wound with my words. So to answer the initial question, I'm going to go back to it. So what's the deal? What's the deal? Aren't they just words? Well, yeah, they're just words, but the words have gravity, they have power, and the motive behind them is what's important, and the history behind them is what's important. So that's what's up with the word being bad. There are bad words out there. Those words shift and change over time, but they do exist. And when we use them, regardless of how appropriate we think that we are or justified in the moment, they carry weight, just like every other word out there. It's just the weight that they carry is negative and does damage. So I'm going to end it there, and I hope that answered the question. If not, come back to me. But I hope it did. I think it did. I feel like it did. And I'll say this. If it didn't, we'll come back and we'll talk about it a little more. But if you have any other topics, we got another one we're going to cover up in a little bit, or cover up. We're going to cover it in a little bit. But if you've got more topics that you'd like to throw out there, you can always shoot me an email. The email is in the show notes. I think it's live.lead.inbetween@gmail.com, and you can get that to me. So with all that said, we're gonna call that, and this has been Live, Lead, and In Between. And I would encourage you to lead well in all that you do.